On today's stream, we're going to be going over on how to make a VTL, which is a virtual tape library, and get that added into Veeam. So we'll go ahead and switch over here. Alright, to start off here, we're going to take a look at the command line interface to be able to install the components that we need to get going here. We'll open up Terminal. And the first thing we're going to do is update the kernel. Whenever I do an install, I like to make sure that's the first thing I do, especially if the ISO has been on the machine for a while without being re-downloaded. And we'll accept this here. Now, this entire section is in a blog post I wrote a couple months back. The link is below. We'll go ahead and install the here. When doing this, we can run this as separate lines, and if you want to troubleshoot to see if there is a package failing to install, you can type them on separate lines. But we'll go ahead and get the HTTPD, the GCC, the Perl for our networking, the SG3 utils, and we'll let those install. And Linux is case sensitive, if you didn't notice that there. And then check to make sure after a reboot where the kernel is versus the kernel devel on version level. And I do like to do the kernel devel separate because sometimes it does have a problem installing, and it's critical to this process. And we're done. Now, you can go through the menu up here to restart, but I find it just as easy to do reboot from the command line interface here. Awesome. And if you've never worked with CentOS installing it, there's going to be a video that posts later on the channel for how to install it with the command line or with a GUI interface and getting your networking set up before you start anything else. So since we've reboot, we're going to go ahead and check into what our kernel versus kernel devel is. So sudo uname r, and it'll have you log in every time you come into the command line interface again for the first time. And I apparently can't talk and type. So this is going to be our kernel level for the machine, and now we're going to do a command to do the RPM build for the kernel dev. We'll just grep so we don't have to read all of those lines. And looking at this here, we have the exact same version, so we can go ahead and move forward. Now, to originally get this download, I did go through the Quadstor website. We can actually go there now to see what that looks like. Or their site's having problems. So I did go ahead and download this already, and this is under our downloads folder for the directory, and this is what the file name should look like once you have it downloaded. We'll go ahead and path to that directory. And the user is going to be whatever user you titled your username account to be. In my case, it's Ren, but keep in mind that anytime there's a capital in Linux, you do need to make sure you're putting a capital in this line. Most notably is downloads has a capital D at the beginning of the statement. If you type in download without a capital D, you will not be able to path to this directory. And we'll just do a quick list to make sure we can see it there, and we can see the Quadstor VTL file just fine. We will do a RPM command to be able to install this, so we'll do RPM IVH in this case. If you do Q and Tab on the keyboard, it'll autofill the file name so you don't have to go through and fill that out manually. Now, while that's installing, we're going to go ahead and come over to what's going to be the backup and replication server. Just to get that machine added into backup and replication so that we don't have to worry and wait on it loading later. So to that, all you need to do is add server, and we will type in the IP address of that server, which, and this are the VTL server, not the machine. And for this account, I've already got them put in here. And apply. It's going to have to install that transport service, which can take a while. So we'll come back over here and see it's going to take a couple more minutes. For the IP address, we can go ahead and modify this while we're waiting. It's going to be the IP address of this server. And we'll check back on the backup and replication server. We have that machine added in. Now this machine right here is actually going to be, if you watch the name of the text over here, the tape server. This is where we're going to have the iSCSI connection from the virtual tape library in order to emulate the drivers through. We can see that here, and that's the address that we used in the backup and replication console. Shouldn't take too much longer here. And it's done. So right after I get this installed, I also like to do a reboot because we have to modify these services that are associated with this machine. Anytime I'm installing something to even CentOS, I like to do that quick reboot. We're going to hop back into command line to do two more things. We're going to make sure the services are starting, and we're going to disable the firewall. This will help for later on whenever we're doing an iSCSI connection. Sometimes the firewall from CentOS can block that connection, and we are not able to do that. So we'll go into systemctl, and we'll enable HTTPD. And of course it wants a password again because it's the first time we're back in this interface. And if you get the created symbolic link in the target, go ahead and run that command again just to make sure. And then we will do the checking at the status of the HTTP service. In this case, it is still inactive. So what I'm actually going to check is to make sure our networking is enabled, which it looks like for some reason it got disabled here. Let's try that again. And we'll reboot with that service enabled. make sure the HTTPD service doesn't have a package waiting. And it looks like it is on the latest version, so we'll go ahead and try the start of that again. Do systemctl enable HTTPD, and then making sure the service status is enable. And it's now active and running. Looks like it just needed an extra reboot there. Sometimes the service can be a little finicky the first time it's been installed right away. And now we're going to make sure the Quadstor service is being activated every time the reboot happens. And we'll have to go into the ECT directory, the RCD directory, and then the INT directory. INIT directory. VTL, and then status. There it is. And then we'll disable the firewall through the system CTL again, and then just to stop firewall D. And of course, we want to check that. And we can see that it's inactive by that line right there. So that's everything that we need to do in order to get the VTL up, and then we can come over here to get to the HTML format. The IP address of the server. Make sure it kept the same connection. And the first thing we need to configure is the physical storage. And we have the 100 gig drive here that we're going to go ahead and add. We're going to leave it on the default settings. There's no reason to change the storage pool in this case. Under the pools, we will add. And we have to name our pool. I'm just going to name it VTL and leave everything else the same. I don't need it to be a worm tape or anything of that nature for this testing purpose. And adding the VTL. The VTL name does have to be for your server 6 characters. And then we can add virtual drives, so it's not just one drive. We're just going to add 2 drives in so we can see that we've modified that number later. And our virtual libraries. And we're going to change this one from an IPM. Those drivers normally add better later. And the V cartridge is actually going to be the space that you can save items to when we add it into the Veeam server. So once we have all of these added in, we can head over to the Veeam Backup, or excuse me, the tape server and add in the iSCSI connection. Now the first time you click on the iSCSI initiator, it's going to give you the warning that the service isn't started. If you haven't already started the service, you can hit yes, and then go back there and hit on iSCSI initiator again. To narrow down the pool to make it easier to find, you can type in the IP address of the tape server and do a quick connect. we should have the VTL, and we can connect and make each of the drives and autoloader active. In this case, we're going to be doing test 00. And we'll go ahead and disconnect the VTL one because we don't need that one currently. Now once you've added these into here, you should be able to come down here to Device Manager and be able to see that medium changer in the background running. And we have that right here. Now, it should let us add it into the Veeam Backup and Replication server. And this is going to be a version 10 server. And yes, this is RTM. Coming over here to the tape infrastructure, we've already added in that tape server, so we can see right here, we can select it from the list. And then it's pretty much just hitting next, next, next to the wizard and waiting. And it's connecting to the tape libraries and info. This is great for anything from like an old server that you just don't know what to do with in the background to anything else with libraries. And doing testing, because we can see each of the drives through here from that virtual tape server that we made, which happens to be IBM. In older versions of Backup and Replication, which is when I originally wrote this in, backup copy only allowed you to make backup copies based on intervals, and if you expired that interval, you only had one copy of that backup, even if it was multiple days together and it just took that long to copy, and it finally caught up. When it comes to making tapes, tapes would allow you to copy backup to backup 1-to-1 ratio. As for the use now, it's great for labs being able to test out drivers, because if you've ever worked with Quadstor, you can add all kinds of different virtual tape libraries of all different kinds of types. So you might be able to test out a driver to see if it works well on that server before you update your tape server you have now, would be my initial thought since we've added into version 10 the backup copy advanced. My favorite feature so far is Linux proxies. So you can scale your entire infrastructure without having to pay for a Windows license. So I would use a Linux proxy because you still have an interface that you can work with on a GUI level. There's less Windows updates, which everyone loves Patch Tuesday. So that would be my argument. I just think they're a lighter weight than I've had experience with Windows core proxies. I would say the biggest other feature that I'm excited about is definitely the NAS backup, because of the change file tracking, making incremental runs on it super fast. We started out with the NTP mode and then trying to copy with file copy, but now it has that kind of integrated tracking so that we can copy all of those directories faster, and it's a faster restore. I would say copy mode is a great feature that's coming out, but even more with the immutability that we'll be able to offer with the AWS. The immutability will be able to lock those files, so not even a support member at Amazon can change those files, let alone a disgruntled admin, which is a nice kind of safety net against ransomware even. It's, in my opinion, a solid replacement if you can't do rotated media at your organization, or you can't count on rotated media. copy mode with immutability on the capacity tier that's coming out in version 10. That's all I had for today. I will be creating the content scale that'll be coming out over the next couple of sessions sometime next week, and I'll be updating that to the channel below.